destination. Darkness is quite near your feet and sunsets through your ears. And tide is rising, drought is non-existent. Sins are washed away, all the faults that you were facing. Sunset chaser, where's your new location? Searching for a purpose, the truth is making you nervous. And sunlight's waiting, there's a happy ending. Picture perfect skies, does your life have any meaning? Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you. Daylight saver till the next adventure. Love is all around, but you're focused on your frowning. Rays are burning, a chemiluminescence, feeling through the gloom, tense and patient for its blooming. Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Sunny, see, there's no point of beating me, as the night took my innocence. I'm starting to see there's no mention of happiness. Life I possess, I offer it to you as you banish regret. In my heart, tape bound, I can't hardly speak. Tracks of my tears slipped away. I am weak as I sing this last melody. Set your own rest. Sunny song is my final request.
Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it's still morning here in Hawaii. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the 41st Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Hale Kalani. And today's Film for Thought discussion with the team behind High Tide, Don't Hide, the Rebel Film Collective. My name is Anna Page. I'm the Director of Programming at the festival, and I'm really thrilled to present this discussion to you as part of our Film for Thought series at HIFF in partnership with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities. As part of this program, this program is designed to combine thought-provoking film with scholarly-led discussion. This is our 12th year presenting the Film for Thought program in partnership with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities, and we're so grateful to continue to present this annual series. This is our final discussion this year as part of our Film for Thought program. However, you can watch all 5 conversations that were featured as part of this program on the line on our HIFF Facebook page or also on our HIFF YouTube channel. So I am going to give some introductions and some housekeeping bits, and then we will get started. First of all, also as part of this program, we have companion essays written by our selected scholars. If you would like to read a companion essay by scholar Jaimey Hamilton Faris about Film for Thought, High Tide, Don't Hide, then you can go to our Film for Thought page on hiff.org and you can check that out. Also, for those of you that are joining us via our streaming platform, our Facebook page, or our YouTube channel, if you would like to ask questions for the panelists or make any comments, you will need to go to our Facebook Live page or our YouTube channel, and you can ask your questions in the comments field in either of those platforms, and they'll be sent directly here to be answered by the panelists. We will have time for questions the last 15 minutes, but you can ask your questions or make any comments anytime during the conversation. Okay, also I would like to introduce our filmmaker team for today's discussion, the Rebel Film Collective, who is an autonomous collective of passionate humans deeply concerned about environmental and social justice. Their aim is to make films and document the incredible people and important events that may otherwise be overlooked. And as part of this discussion today, we have Neva Kay, who is the writer, co-director, and co-producer of the film. Emily McDowell, who is the co-director and co-producer, Nia Phipps, who is the co-director and producer, and as well as Fili Fepulea i-Tapua, who is one of the young heroes featured in the film. And the discussion will be hosted by our scholar, which is today Jaimey Hamilton Faris, who is a professor in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Hawai at Mānoa. Before we open up our discussion, I would also like to introduce Liz Soto, who is the Communications Director at Hawaii Council for the Humanities, to talk a little bit more about this year's Film for Thought team and a little bit more about our scholar for today's discussion.
Thank you again so much, Anna. Aloha mai kako. Thank you everybody for being here. I am Liz Soto, the Communications Director of Hawaii Council for Humanities, which is a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We started in 1972, so we've been supporting innovative Hawaii-centered humanities programming for nearly 50 years. Our mission is to connect people with ideas that enrich lives, broaden perspectives, and strengthen communities. And you can find out more about us at hihumanities.org. So welcome to our 5th and final Film for Thought event for 2021. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the whole team at HIFF. This collaboration is always such a pleasure. And as Anna mentioned, this is our 12th annual event, but we really want to honor the ways the HIFF team have navigated the combination of virtual and in-person events this year. I personally really appreciated the push back into theaters, and I'd really forgotten what a pleasure it is to have that collective viewing experience. The theme this year is recovering, rebuilding, and reimagining across time and space, which seems particularly relevant in this time of turmoil, transition, and potential. The documentary genre gives us an opportunity to dig deep, to see and listen to multiple perspectives, to ask questions, some of them painful, with no ready or easy answers. High Tide, Don't Hide, in its exploration of climate change movement through New Zealand's school strike for climate, shows us the ways our world is in crisis, while also inspiring us with the voices of young people who are willing to have the difficult conversations we must have to find a way towards recovery and rebuilding, particularly in Oceania, where many of our communities are already experiencing the devastation wrought by climate change. Our Film for Thought scholar is Jaimey Hamilton Faris, who is an associate professor of contemporary art history and critical theory at the University of Hawai at Mānoa. She is an affiliate faculty in Pacific Island Studies, the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience, and International Cultural Studies. Based in Honolulu since 2006, she's organized community arts and cultural programs both inside and outside of institutional spaces across the Hawaiian archipelago. In her essay, Jaimey writes that our youth are our future ancestors, and I'm reminded of the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Jaimey's artistic practice has inspired me for years, rooted in our real experiences and our hopes and fears for the future. It is such a pleasure to welcome her today. Thank you.
Mahalo, Liz, and aloha mai kako, aloha everyone from Hawaii Nei and across Moana Nui Kea as well. It's my privilege and responsibility to connect us all across this great expansive space of Oceania. And so I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation with you all today. So thank you all first for making this beautiful film, and welcome to HIFF. And for those in the audience that haven't seen the film yet, as Liz has suggested, High Tide, Don't Hide traces the intertwining paths of 5 different high school activists, including Fili. And so I'm very excited to have Fili join us here in the conversation with all of the filmmakers. So Fili, Neva, Emily, Nia, welcome. And all of you are so deeply concerned with social justice, climate justice, large-scale transformation, doing this amazing, difficult work. But you are all also committed to storytelling, to making media, to performing as part of this work. And so I wanted to just kind of start our conversation off today thinking about what the arts contributes to social justice and climate justice. And as someone who works in the arts and community organization area, I often get confronted with questions about why art matters, right, to these important issues. Sometimes I feel the urge to want to put my energy into policy changing, to getting signatures, to cleaning waterways, to doing something that feels more concrete maybe than art does at times. But you have all chosen this path, as I have, as part of your activism. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on why this is important to you. And so Rebel Film Collective, whoever wants to maybe start us off, and then Fili, I would love to get your thoughts on this as well.
Who would like to go first? I'm happy to do a little introduction. Okay. Thank you, Jaimey. Kia ora, tēnā koutou from New Zealand, and aloha. It's an absolute privilege and a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to have some of our team. We are missing Phil Stebbing, who is also a co-producer, co-director, and obviously having Aingaila Fili here as well as an honour. Thanks, Fili, for joining us. So good to see your face. Regarding storytelling, yes, you are right. It is sometimes hard to see what the immediate effect is, and it takes great fortitude and collaboration. No one person in our group could have done this alone. We needed each other, which is why we formed the group, and we all brought both shared skills and specific skills to the process. And I personally have chosen this path of storytelling with this work and other work that I do. It just happens to be what I've amassed my skills around, as well as being an activist, and it is the way that that unknown stories.
I think we might
might otherwise pass by the attention of people get to come to the surface and be discussed and provoke and share and inspire and harmonize and disrupt. And there's all of this power with telling a story, and it gains its own momentum. Anyone else?
Something that I love about, is this sounding okay? Stories is how we know that a story well told literally provokes the physical reaction in the audience. That makes us feel like we're sharing the experience, and shared experience is what empathy is based on. Empathy is what behavioral change is based on. So if you want to show that there is a different way to live well, or to highlight issues that need addressing, then storytelling is the best way to connect with people, to make them share those perceptions and lead to different behavior. And I also think that storytelling reflects culture, which is important for our understanding of perhaps our blind spots and bonuses, but it also shapes culture by giving us all new examples of how we can live differently. So it's both sort of reflective and visionary, and also I think it's really important to have stories that retain knowledge, so that lessons learned from one experience to the next can be passed on, which is really particularly useful in every context, but also in social movements, so that mistakes about, in this case, for example, inclusion, representation, don't need to be repeated again and again, but can be, people can learn from others' experience.
Neva and Fili, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that storytelling has been something that's existed for centuries within Pacifica alone. And I think it's beautiful the way in indigenous ways of life, we know storytelling, it shifts culture, it shifts society, it shifts the way that we perceive things. In the context of the film, I think storytelling was an important form to bring into activism because of those blind spots that Emily was talking about. Blind spots that include inaccessibility towards knowledge, that includes science, that includes all this jargon that maybe those socioeconomic areas just don't connect to. So using art as a way to bridge that gap is a really powerful form of advocacy and an important part of activism.
Beautifully put. We might have lost, I think I lost a few phrases there, Fili, from what you said, but I think the important sentiment that I'm getting across the board is that there is kind of a false dichotomy maybe, or a false separation between storytelling and activism or political work and scientific knowledge, and all of these things are part of culture. So Neva, do you have any last thoughts that you want to add to this before we maybe move on to this larger question of meeting each other that Nia brought up?
No, yeah, I think this was, everyone pretty much covered all the spots. Essentially, culture is what eventually changes policy. The people who make policy are influenced by our shared culture as well. So making art, every form of art, is how we change together our society, and policy follows that. So there is absolutely no separation. And I think we say in the climate action movement, we need all the things. We need those people who go to parliament. We need those people who stand on the steps of parliament, and we need the artists, and we need the storytellers, and we need everyone. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I really wanted to turn the focus of our conversation today to the importance of working collectively, because it's such an important message in the film, but also you as filmmakers work as a collective, which I would imagine is pretty difficult to do. And so I wanted to really talk about what working collectively means, and share some thoughts on this. So in the film, we learn not only about what motivates each of the youth to become involved, and also the beauties and the difficulties of working collectively. And one of the core stories in the film revolves around what it means to organize collectively across settler, Maori, and Pacific Islander cultures. And in the film, one of the central concerns is raised by Fili about the ways that Pacific Islander voices have been excluded, or if included, maybe tokenized in the SS4C events. And this tension is largely unresolved in the film. So I wanted us to just reflect on what it meant for each of you to work collectively during the film, and what that might mean in different instances. For the Rebel Film Collective, what's the importance of making a film collectively? Mia, you said, that you all have different skills and that you're bringing those different skills, and maybe there's specific stories of support that you want to share as well. And to Fili, I wanted to know what the importance of maybe redefining collectives, as you did with For the Culture, in the context of your movement making meant. Like, how is it important for you to kind of build a new collective? Maybe again, Fili, would you mind starting this time? Would that be okay? Okay.
Thank you so much for that question. I think that the reasoning behind For the Culture starting as a collective was so important because we didn't want to be spoken over. We didn't want to be spoken over or spoken for, and we knew the importance of representing such a large community within not only just New Zealand, but connecting to the wider islands in the Pacific. We knew it was important to have that be a broad perspective, and it couldn't be just put in at the last minute or just be watered down for the sake of fitting into this collective that was already existing. Which is why we decided to make For the Culture, and we thought it would be way more powerful if we collaborated with SS4C, which is exactly what happened. And so, like you say, there were rocky parts of the journey, but in the end, it was all for the greater good. And I believe that it really did work out well, and that we achieved our goals of being able to work together as collectives and bring together two perspectives from New Zealand that don't really get to work together at all, really, in wider New Zealand. So I think it's a powerful example from the youth as well. So that's my experience from that.
And are you still a collective? Are you still meeting? What's the work that you're carrying on right now?
Thank you for asking. For the Culture is definitely still working as a collective. Our focus has shifted a bit more to COVID initiatives and helping our community heal from all the different battles that come with that, as well as looking at COP26 and the outcomes from that and what we can do to move forward and bring that knowledge into our community. And so that's what we're up to nowadays.
Great, thanks. We can circle back to that. I would love to know more about your thoughts on COP26, so we can return to that. For the Rebel Film Collective, please, I would love to know how you all formed and what held you together through this process of making the film.
Yeah, so the Rebel Film Collective is actually broader than the four of us who have made Hide, Don't Hide. And we've kind of formed as a pretty loose collective of people who were going to document all the different type of climate action that started happening in 2018, 2019, especially after the IPCC report that came out in October 2018, I think. And from the get-go, we wanted to adhere to anarchist principles, so not having hierarchies and using consensus decision making where we could and when it was appropriate. And so that was sort of like the initial sort of get-go, and there have been other people on the ground with cameras going and filming all sorts of, whether it was Extinction Rebellion, SS4C, and other actions happening and supporting those groups locally, kind of coordinated via this framework of the Rebel Film Collective. And then as the story of SS4C, as the stories that we started seeing in Thames and then growing into other parts of the country, just was so inspiring and so powerful with the youth and the work they were doing. We started to focus into creating this specific story, growing that specific story into a bigger film, essentially. Yeah.
Love that I can hear the chickens or something behind you, Neva. Yeah, I mean, making a film is hard at the best of times, and sharing the load with like-minded activists who, the four of us, once we'd galvanized, and obviously we were in different locations. So basically, Neva started in Thames and connected with Phil, who isn't here today. And then it rolled out from that as that particular movement from SS4C grew. And Neva connected with Fili, and it became quite clear that there was much at play beyond the important movement, but also unlayering and documenting the fact that all of these movements have layers, and taking an anti-racist position is very important. So it became quite clear that it was a bigger story. As far as the working together, it isn't easy. Just like any situation, a hierarchical situation is far worse, in my opinion. But yeah, we've had to have a process and a deep commitment to each other over a very long period of time, and we've done it. We've done it in our spare time. We all have families. We have jobs that have come and gone or grown or whatever around the same time. So it was a deep initial commitment that had to be continually committed to in order to get through that very long process of not only the shooting but the editing and all of the planning. And we did it for free, and in some cases, carried along certain aspects or applied for funding. We didn't get much funding, so we've done basically the power of our union as a group has meant that we've been able to make something that means a lot and brings a very important discussion to the table that people around the world can see. So it's hard sometimes, but any film is hard, whether you're getting paid or not. So getting it across the line is an achievement. The real benefit in my view is that our commitment to the cause, the story, and actually to the style has been very thorough.
You mentioned style, Nia. What do you mean by style?
In terms of decision making?
Mm-hmm. Is that what you're talking about in terms of decision making? I see.
Yeah. So obviously, with a consensus-based approach, we have to agree, and that has taken different forms depending on what phase of the film we were at. So, for instance, while we were all on lockdown last year, that happened to coincide with the editing process. So there was a lot of notes going backwards and forwards. Fortunately, in some ways, we had nothing else to take our attention quite so deeply. So that basis of where Neva was in the suite with Thomas Gleason, our editor, nutting out a story from something like, was it 22 gig of footage or something? Is a lot of footage.
14 terabytes.
Oh, 40 terabytes. Yeah. So a lot, and it was no small feat. that they managed to really get to the heart of the story that needed to be told. And that was a process where we shared the cuts and gave notes and refined. Some things were cut that maybe we didn't all agree with. Some things were included that were ultimately for the best, but maybe weren't fully, they weren't the direction of one person's vision. And then through that process of consensus, we deeply and robustly discussed things that were important to us, and came to those decisions, ultimately knowing that what we were trying to do is do the best for the film. And it was actually, in retrospect, a very good process. Sometimes at the time it was hard, but we've tried to keep it light. There's been no breakups. I think we'll still be able to do something in the future.
That's so important, that consensus building. And I'm assuming, Fili, that Talanoa is also a big part of collaboration and collectivity in your work too.
Definitely. I think part of activism and advocacy is being held accountable by the communities you're from. And so in order to do that and get to that point, Talanoa is something I take really seriously, because I know when we're doing, especially with this film, it wasn't just my story and my perspective. It was representative of a lot of people that I love and I hold dear, and a lot of people who are actually living these realities on the front line. And so Talanoa was such an important aspect of this, and something that we did with the filmmakers as well. We had some really robust discussions again before we even started filming for the film, and even the process in the middle, the process at the end, even when it was the final cut, all of it. And that's something I'm really grateful for.
So that continuation of dialogue along the way, so important.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. That's a huge takeaway, I think, for the folks who are watching. So maybe we can dive into that more if folks have questions. And I just wanted to remind everyone who's watching that if they have questions, it will be time to open up and hear your questions and get some answers to those very shortly. And I wanted to just also specifically invite any Hawaii youth who are watching us today to join in the conversation. I think what's most important about High Tide, Don't Hide is that it shares the importance of justice approaches in climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Fighting for climate change, as you have all been talking about, is not just about mitigating future costs, right? It's about inclusion and thinking about what the next generation is going to have access to. And one of the key elements of the film is in thinking about the present and ongoing cultural elimination across Pacific Island cultures, right? And cultural elimination takes the form of loss of land, access to water, agriculture, forced migration, and more. And so the stories of organizing for climate in Oceania offer these powerful lessons for organizing youth in Hawaii and building solidarity for the rest of the Pacific. And so Hawaii's high schoolers out there, you are all, as Liz mentioned, you are all our future ancestors. So those of you who are listening to the conversation, I'd love for you to ask if you, or share if you have lessons of your own for the panel, or if you have questions for the panel. We would love to hear them, and we would also love to hear your voice as part of this conversation. What kinds of futures do you want to see? So please put those comments in the chat. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to do that. And while they do, I just had one final quick question for you all before I opened it up. In terms of thinking about what you're doing now in relationship to climate change and climate justice, Fili, you mentioned COP26, and I'm sure that's all on our minds, right? Because the discussions just got done, and it's now been 3 years since the youth climate strikes that you all participated in Aotearoa. And, we just saw in the last few weeks, Greta Thunberg and Brianna Froyan from Samoa and other youth activists make a huge impact on the activist protests outside COP26. But in the meetings, world leaders, made promises, but Greta Thunberg also, called them out for just talk, blah, 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 that they might have made promises, but they weren't necessarily leading their governments to actually do the work for meeting the commitments that they promised within the meetings. And so I just wondered what kinds of reflections you all might have on COP26 and what kind of work needs to be done now if filmmaking, if Rebel Collective wants to get involved in this next iteration of youth climate strikes, or where that might be going in terms of your work, and Fili, where it might be going in terms of for the culture. Fili, do you want to start since it's clear that you that this is part of your initiative already?
Yeah, I think it's exactly like you said. While we're on one hand seeing these amazing leaders from the Pacific, we saw Tuvalu speak, we saw Brianna speak, we saw the protest outside that were carrying some amazing Pacifica flags that just take me back to our strike. But on the other hand, we're not seeing that same energy across the board. We're not seeing enough action, exactly like Greta's saying. And it reminds me that there's no mechanism around losses done by climate change at COP26. There's no important infrastructure put in place for people who are going to be, like I said before, on the front lines, or who are facing all these challenges. And it's really disheartening because we can see that it's making Pacific Islands shift to mitigation instead of shift to adaptation instead of mitigation. And we're going to have to sacrifice things that I don't think is our responsibility to sacrifice, compared to some large countries who are emitting the most carbon emissions, who are doing all of these things. And so while it's very daunting and it's very disheartening, I think it's also a massive example from the Pacific and from Indigenous people across the board, of what the bar is for climate justice around the world. And so that will be a challenge, but it's also a challenge we don't have the privilege of giving up or stopping or not continuing. And so when it comes to for the culture, I think that whilst we're going to have to move into things like adaptation talks, we're going to have to move into what it looks like for our homelands to have to go through those processes. I know that work will be just as important as the work that we've done so far. And so I'm interested to see and how that will go and how hopefully things will change. Because we are reimagining a future where it won't be disheartening and it won't be daunting and it won't be all of these horrible feelings that we might feel because of COP26. And so that imagination and that vision is what I am focused on and what I hope to see.
Excellent, thank you. I love the power and the energy that you're bringing to bear there. We have to keep going, and I'm imagining Rebel Film Collective too is thinking about this in terms of larger social justice frameworks as well. So Nia, I see that you're ready to.
Yeah, I just have a couple of small thoughts on that. I mean, the frustration is obviously that there's inclinations and promises, but as Fili noted, there's not enough. You want to see what's being set up to alleviate and tackle, and just definite numbers and commitments. And I mean, even though our government declared a climate change emergency in 2020, end of 2020, I think December. What does that actually mean in terms of resource and support and awareness and bringing it to the top of the table at every opportunity? It's sometimes it feels like it's just lip service. I note that James Shaw, our Green co-leader, went over to COP26, and even he, who, you know, no doubt James Shaw is an amazing green activist, but he was awarded a Fossil of the Day for some, I don't know the exact thing that he didn't want to sign up to, but it was, he was awarded one alongside Boris Johnson. So I thought that was interesting. You know, there's still politics at play where people aren't able to or don't want to commit beyond their remit. And I think we have to stop doing that and really address the problems that are present for us now and are only going to get worse as we move forward.
And I want to add that in terms of, I'll just add that quickly, and Emily, you'll have a go. Sorry. In terms of the Rebel Film Collective, we're still at the moment very much focused on bringing High Tide, Don't Hide to as many people as possible, with that call for action, which is limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, with the big focus on climate justice, on anti-racist work, and so that for us looks like getting it into every high school in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is definitely our goal. And we are in conversations on how to achieve that, but also getting it into audiences as broadly as possible with resources to help, work through those issues that are presented in the film. So our main focus is bringing this film, this piece of work, to as many people as possible to have those conversations, which are completely, relevant now as they were in 2019.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone has said. Nia, you're talking about how our politicians, even with the I imagine many more people have the desire to make a lot more stronger pledges than they are, and not coming through for many, many reasons, as well as blah, blah, blah. Greta Thunberg also said, we can no longer let the people in power decide what hope is, but also what is politically possible. And I want to share a quick story, and I don't want to underestimate the significance of what hasn't been delivered at COP. But it reminded me of, I went to COP15 way back in 2009, and it was a gigantic conference hall, and in the middle of this gigantic conference hall full of people, there was a tiny cafe, and in that tiny cafe there was food that was wrapped in plastic, dry, untasty, not nutritious, and really wouldn't have given a lot of sustenance to the most people who were in that hall. And that seemed so surprising, and also kind of so symbolic of the inadequacies of COP, that something as fundamental as feeding people wasn't being looked after properly. And yet that was all that was available under that structure. So we ate what was there. And even while that was happening, there were activists, there were leaders, there were amazing humans from all around the world sharing stories and sharing inspiration. So even in that context, there was still things to be gained from it. And if I could, taking that more metaphorically, outside of that structure, there are many, many ways to feed ourselves well and share the food that we have available, and also change the food system. And the lesson for next time is, plan ahead, keep going, find different ways to share food and grow it and get it into the system. Because like Fili says, we have no choice but to make ourselves thrive as well as possible by sharing the resources that we have and making sure that our leaders don't limit our prospects for survival.
Well said, Emily. I wanted to include one question that we have in the comment section here, and see if I can get some quick feedback from you all on this before we close out. The question is, what is some advice you can offer to Hawaii students just starting to get involved? Any lessons from your experience?
Yes. Oh my gosh, where to start? Firstly, I would say, if you are Indigenous Hawaiian, to lean into your culture and lean into your background, because I think often in the climate justice space, we tend to look at environmentalism through a Eurocentric lens, through a lens that is not one of our own, even though our culture and our history holds so much of the same values and the same lessons in it. So I would say lean into your culture, because that is the difference that you have to bring to the conversation, and it makes all the difference, like it really does. The second thing I would say is that whenever it feels like it's scary to use your voice, something that I learned across my journey was that my hope and my love for my people and for our future and the things that I want to see and that I'm dreaming to see in the climate space was so much more important than my fear. And that is something that cannot be easy to get to, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it is so important to constantly tell yourself that, because there are people that are there who relentlessly believe in what you're saying and relentlessly believe in what you have to bring to the table. So never doubt that, and never doubt yourself when it comes to these spaces that need your voice, because they need a diverse collective of voices. And the last thing I would say is that 99% of advocacy and these movements are not talking, they're actually listening. 99% of it is listening to everyone else, and then that 1% is you telling your own story, and sharing your lessons on what you've learned from everyone else. And so that's pretty much my 3 quick hard and fast lessons for if you're starting to get involved, and hopefully that helps.
Beautiful, Fili. Lean into your culture, listen. Awesome advice. For Rebel Film Collective, any other insights?
Emily, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have on our website that talk about mental health and such things? Did you want to mention any of that? Or I can point people there.
You go for it.
Okay, so obviously a big message in the film is the anxiety and how people are dealing with the significant mental stress being faced with changes in their environment, and understanding that there's not enough action being taken. So we were aware very early on that was a key factor in the story and in the issue at large. So we do have resources and places to connect on our website. The URL is hightide-don'thide.com. But connecting to each other, as Fili says, using your voice but also joining with others, and knowing that you're not alone. There are existing groups that you can join where you would find huge amounts of support, or if that's not the case, make your own group. But lending your voice to a collective is very helpful, because you often find that your concerns are not yours alone, they are shared concerns, and that can be very empowering. I'm just going to have a little look what we've got listed. So yeah, we just say get organized, look after each other. There are places, if you feel really desperate, reach out, find help at various organizations like Youthline, etc. But for me, my personal take on that is that connecting and sharing, listening, and taking whatever action is within the realm of your own possibilities, even if it is small. Going and picking up rubbish, or joining a local orchard or a garden, so that you're around like-minded people. That is a step in the right direction in order to share the burden.
Beautiful, everyone. I mean, this brings us really full circle into the importance of working collectively, and the importance of supporting each other and lifting each other, and also the importance of culture and the imagination, as you as you said, but I think both Nia and Emily were saying, like, this question of working around or working past what is politically possible. I think you all mentioned it, actually. That we get stifled by that, by what seems or what is told to us as what is possible. When we lean into culture and we support each other, so much more is possible, right? So much more seems possible. So I am taking that away from our conversation today. I don't know if we have time for this question, but if we can try and squeeze in like maybe very short answers to this last question, and then we'll say goodbye. What would the question is, what roles do you see adults taking in supporting youth in their work? Just maybe some short, quick answers to Devin.
One thing that adults can share is their mistakes, and also the things that we have learnt from. We can help by holding some continuity of that. So, Fili, I wonder if I think this is true for the culture too, that mentors can be there to support young people as well as learn from them and the actions that are taken. And we can also be right alongside and be saying the things that need to be said, sharing the stories that need to be shared, and also standing back and holding your backs.
Wonderful. Any other quick thoughts? I think that's really important advice, Emily, because the adults now are also our future ancestors, right? The youth are our future ancestors. Adults now are future ancestors too. So we all just need to, sit with that question. What we want to, what kind of future we want to bring to those that are coming next. So with that in mind, I just wanted to thank you all for your time today. Malama pono. Take care all, and I hope to reconnect with you all in the near future. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing about working collectively. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. I just want to pop in and give another huge mahalo nui to Fili and Neva and Mia and Emily and Jaimey for hosting today's discussion. What a wonderful discussion that we've had this morning. Just as a reminder, we will actually have this conversation will be up on our HIFF YouTube page and on our HIFF YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. So if you would like to watch this later, or if any of the panelists would like to share it on, feel free. This will be up for the foreseeable future so that teachers and students are able to chime in and watch. If for any reason any of you watching have not watched High Tide Don't Hide yet, you can watch that on our streaming service up until November 28th. So you can find more information about how to watch the film at hiff.org, and then that will be available directly on our website at watch.hiff.org or on a streaming app on your device of choice. So you can definitely check that out before the 28th if you've not already viewed the film. I also want to let everyone know that Hawaii Council for the Humanities is actually organizing a climate change poetry workshop for youth with Craig Santos Perez. And that's going to be on Monday, November 22nd at 4:30 p.m. So any students or teachers watching today, you can find out more information on hihumanities.org about that poetry workshop. And again, just another huge mahalo nui to Hawaii Council for the Humanities for partnering in this program this year. We're so grateful. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.